The rain started an hour before my shift, a cold, insistent drizzle that greased the cobblestones and made the old streetlights swim in halos of gold. I parked my beat-up sedan a block away, as instructed, and walked the rest, the weight of my empty wallet a sharper prod than any supervisor's order. The museum wasn't much to look at from the outside, just a large, blocky building of soot-darkened brick, squatting behind a high iron fence. It had once been a private manor, the hiring agent had told me, built by a shipping magnate with more money and eccentricity than sense. Now it held his collection, a jumble of artifacts and art he'd hauled back from his travels. The job was simple, she'd said. Walk the halls, watch the doors. A quiet gig for a quiet man. I needed quiet. I needed the steady paycheck. A man was waiting for me just inside the service entrance, a silhouette against the warm, dim light of the foyer. He was older, maybe 60, with a face carved from weathered wood and hair the color of granite. He introduced himself as Shaw, the head of security. His handshake was dry and firm, his eyes doing a quick, efficient inventory of me. He didn't seem impressed, but he didn't seem disappointed either. He just seemed tired. Your predecessor, Mr. Evans, took a sudden leave of absence, Shaw said, his voice a low rumble. Family emergency, he said. Left no forwarding address. The work is not difficult, but it is precise. Do you understand precise, Mr. Miller? I can follow instructions, I said. He gave a short, non-committal grunt and led me inside, the heavy door clicking shut with a sound of finality. He showed me the locker room, a small tiled space that smelled of old bleach and older sweat. Locker 7 was mine. Inside hung a single navy blue uniform shirt, stiff and new. My name was already stitched over the breast pocket. That was fast, I remembered thinking. I'd only been hired 2 days ago. Next was the security office, a windowless room dominated by a bank of black and white monitors, showing flickering views of empty halls and silent galleries. The console was an old analog system, a tangle of switches and dials beneath the screens. Shaw handed me a heavy rubber-coated flashlight, a key set that felt like it weighed 10 pounds, and a radio clipped to a base unit that hummed with a low static. Your patrol route is mapped here, he said, tapping a laminated sheet on the desk. It showed a labyrinth of corridors and rooms, with a red line tracing a path through them. You will walk the entire route once at the top of every hour. The rest of the time, you will remain here, monitoring the feeds. You will perform a full inventory of the supply locker at exactly midnight, and again at 4 in the morning. You will not, under any circumstances, leave this post before your relief arrives at 6 a.m. Do you have any questions so far? It seems straightforward, I said. Shaw's eyes held mine for a beat too long. It is, until it isn't he. Opened a drawer in the desk and pulled out a single sheet of paper, yellowed at the edges and covered in dense, typewritten text. He slid it across the desk to me. This is the addendum. Read it. Memorize it. Your life depends on it. I picked up the paper. The heading read, Addendum to Security Protocol. The Ethelred Collection. Below it was a numbered list. 1. All patrols must be completed within a 13-minute window. If you finish early, you must wait until the 13-minute mark has passed before re-entering the security office. If you are late, you must proceed directly to the grand foyer and remain there, counting the tiles on the floor until the top of the next hour. 2. The motion sensors are unreliable in the West Wing. Ignore any alerts from that sector between the hours of 1 a.m. and 3 a.m. 3. You may hear footsteps following you on your patrol. Do not turn to look. Do not acknowledge them in any way. Increase your walking pace by approximately 20% until the sound ceases. 4. The statue of the weeping woman in Gallery 3 will sometimes be facing the eastern archway when you begin your patrol. This is acceptable. If, upon your return, she is facing the western archway, you must return to the main doors and re-enter the gallery, announcing your presence by clearing your throat twice. 5. The thermostat in the Hall of Antiquities will read 10 degrees below the setting. Do not attempt to adjust it. Do not remark upon the cold. 6. If any of the classical statues in the Greek exhibit appear to be smiling, leave the gallery immediately. Do not look back. Report the incident in your log simply as an expression change. 7. The service elevator is for freight only. If you hear the bell chime and the doors open to reveal an empty car, press the closed door button repeatedly until it obeys. Do not enter. 8. Your radio may pick up a transmission on channel 4 that sounds like a child singing. Change the channel immediately. Do not listen to the song. 9. The reflection in the glass case containing the Etruscan dagger will sometimes show a figure standing behind you. Do not turn around. The reflection is a lie. Wait until the figure dissipates, which should take no longer than 15 seconds. 10. At precisely 2:10 a.m., you must go to the janitor's closet on the second floor and turn the faucet on for a count 10 seconds, then off. There will be the sound of running water from within the walls for several minutes afterward. This is normal. 11. If you encounter a man in a brown custodial uniform, you may greet him, but do not ask him any questions. If he offers you a tool or an item, refuse politely but firmly. He is not part of the staff. 12. The number of display cases in the main hall is 27. If you count 28, close your eyes and count again. Repeat until the number is correct. 13. You are the only security personnel on site between the hours of 10 p.m. and 6 a.m. Any other person you see is not real. Follow the procedures outlined above for specific instances. 14. Under no circumstances are you to enter the sub-basement. The door is marked. It is always locked. If you find it unlocked, do not touch it. Radio me immediately, regardless of the hour. I read through the list once, then again. I looked up at Shaw, expecting a smirk, a sign this was some elaborate hazing ritual for the new guy. His face was granite. "You're joking," I said. "I have never been more serious in my life, Mr. Miller," he replied, his voice flat. "Every one of these rules is here for a reason." Evans thought they were a joke. He lasted 3 weeks. You will follow them to the letter. Your first patrol begins at 11 p.m. Do not be late. He turned and left without another word, the service door groaning shut and the lock engaging with a heavy thud. I was alone. The hum of the monitors and the whisper of the ventilation system were the only sounds. I looked down at the list again. The statue of the weeping woman will sometimes be facing the eastern archway. This was insane, but the job paid 3 times the standard rate for overnight security. It was enough to start chipping away at the mountain of medical debt my mother had left behind. I could humor a few eccentric rules for that kind of money. I folded the paper and tucked it into my shirt pocket, right over my heart. Then I checked my watch. It was 10:42, 18 minutes until my first patrol. I sat in the worn swivel chair, the leather creaking under my weight, and stared at the flickering screens. On one, a marble statue of a discus thrower stood frozen in perpetual motion. On another, a suit of armor held a silent vigil in an empty hall. Everything was still. Everything was normal. I was a practical man. I believed in things I could see and touch. This list was the stuff of ghost stories, the kind you tell around a campfire to scare kids. But Shaw hadn't seemed like a storyteller. He'd seemed like a man giving a set of vital, operational commands. Your life depends on it. At 10:59, I stood, clipped the radio to my belt, hefted the heavy keys, and picked up the flashlight. I unlocked the security office door and stepped out into the main corridor. The air changed immediately. It was cooler and carried a scent of dust and old wood, of lemon polish and something else, something faintly metallic, like ozone after a lightning strike. The lights were dim, set into sconces along the walls, casting deep, dancing shadows. My route, according to the laminated map, started down the main corridor, through the grand foyer, into the Hall of Antiquities. A loop through the Greek Gallery, then the West Wing, past Gallery 3, and back. A 13-minute walk at a brisk pace. I started my watch. The grand foyer was a vast 2-story space with a black and white checkered floor. A grand staircase swept up to the second floor, and life-size statues stood on plinths along the walls. I remembered Rule 12 and counted the glass display cases. 1, 2, 3. I reached 27. I felt a ridiculous sense of relief. The Hall of Antiquities was next. As I crossed the threshold, a wave of cold hit me, so sharp it made the skin on my arms prickle. I glanced up at the thermostat mounted near the door. Its digital display read 52 degrees Fahrenheit. The setting, according to a small plaque, was 62. Rule 5, do not attempt to adjust it. I walked faster, my footsteps echoing in the frigid air. The artifacts here were behind glass, pottery shards, bronze arrowheads, a gold funeral mask with hollow eyes. I could see my breath pluming in the air, and for a moment, I thought I saw a second, fainter plume just beside me. I fixed my gaze straight ahead and kept walking. The Greek Gallery was a long, rectangular room. The statues here were white marble, gods and athletes frozen in time. I scanned their faces as I walked, Apollo with his lyre, stern and beautiful. Aphrodite, gazing into a non-existent pool. Their faces were serene, neutral, or somber. None of them were smiling. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. It is in the West Wing that I heard it. The soft, unmistakable sound of a footfall on the parquet floor behind me. It was exactly in time with my own step. I stopped. The footfall behind me stopped a half-second later. My heart hammered against my ribs. Rule 3, do not turn to look. I forced myself to start walking again and increase my pace, just as the rule instructed. The footsteps behind me resumed, keeping perfect time. Tap, tap, tap. I walked faster, my hand gripping the flashlight like a club. For 30 agonizing seconds, the sound matched mine, step for step. Then, as I neared the end of the West Wing corridor, they simply faded away, swallowed by the silence. I was sweating despite the cold. I checked my watch. I had been walking for 10 minutes. I still had Gallery 3. I pushed open the heavy oak door and entered. Gallery 3 was dedicated to more modern, or at least more recent, acquisitions. It was a smaller, more intimate space. And there, in the center, was the Weeping Woman. She was made of a dark, polished basalt, kneeling, her face buried in her hands. Her posture was one of utter despair. According to my patrol sheet, she was supposed to be facing the eastern archway, the one I had just entered through. She was. I noted it in my mental log and continued my patrol, walking the perimeter of the room. I glanced at a case of medieval reliquaries, my back to the statue for no more than 20 seconds. When I turned to leave through the western archway, a primal jolt of fear went through me. The weeping woman was now facing me. Her back was to the eastern archway, her hidden face directed toward the western exit. My mouth went dry. Rule 4. If, upon your return, she is facing the western archway, you must return to the main doors and re-enter the gallery, announcing your presence by clearing your throat twice. It felt idiotic. It was the most difficult thing I had ever done. I forced my legs to carry me back out the way I came, through the eastern archway, into the main corridor. I stood there for a 5 count, my breath shaky. Then I stepped back into Gallery 3. The statue was still facing the west. I stopped just inside the doorway, clenched my fists, and cleared my throat. Twice. The sound was horribly loud in the quiet room. Nothing happened. The statue didn't move. The world didn't end. I stood there for another 10 seconds, feeling like a fool, then turned and practically ran for the western archway. I didn't look back. I burst out into the corridor and hurried back to the security office, my heart still thumping a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I slammed the door shut behind me and locked it, leaning against the cool metal, breathing heavily. I looked at the clock on the console. 12 minutes and 40 seconds. I had finished early. Rule 1. If you finish early, you must wait until the 13-minute mark has passed before re-entering the security office. You have got to be kidding me, I muttered to the empty room. But I stayed by the door, watching the second hand sweep on the clock. I waited those final 20 seconds, the silence of the office pressing in on me. When the clock hit the 13-minute mark, I finally stepped away from the door and collapsed into the chair. I pulled the list from my pocket. My hands were trembling slightly. I read through each rule again, no longer seeing a joke, but a series of landmines. I had just navigated 2 of them. The footsteps, the statue. This was not a quiet gig. This was a minefield, and Shaw had given me the map. I had 11.5 hours to go. I looked at the monitor showing Gallery 3. The weeping woman was still facing the western archway. I didn't look away from the screen until the top of the next hour, when it was time to start my second patrol. The next few nights settled into a strange, tense rhythm. I became a creature of procedure. I learned the exact number of steps between the security office and the Grand Foyer. 142. I knew the precise squeak in the floorboard near the Hall of Antiquities, the one that always sounded like a footstep behind me, but wasn't. I performed the 2:10 a.m. faucet ritual without fail, listening to the subsequent groaning and gurgling in the pipes with a clinical detachment. I saw the man in the brown custodial uniform once, mopping the floor in the West Wing with slow, deliberate strokes. I gave him a curt nod, as per Rule 11. He did not look up, but I saw his hands, gnarled and strong, gripping the mop handle. He was there. He was real. Or he was a very convincing, not real thing. My patrols were a study in hypervigilance. I counted the 27 cases in the main hall every single time. I never looked at the reflection in the Etruscan dagger-esque case. I never smiled back at the stoic Greek statues. The cold in the Hall of Antiquities became a simple fact of the environment, like gravity. I was complying, and I was safe. The fear became a low-grade hum in the background, a constant companion, but not a paralyzing one. I was earning my money. It was on the end of my second week that the first real temptation came. I was on my 1 a.m. patrol, moving through the West Wing. The motion sensor alert for this sector had blipped on the console just before I left, but I ignored it, as per rule, too. The corridor here was lined with oil paintings, landscapes, and portraits, whose eyes seemed to follow you under the dim light. I was halfway down its length when I heard it. A voice. It was my Mother-S voice. It came from a side corridor, a dead-end hallway that housed a single, unremarkable landscape and a potted fern. David, honey, are you there? I am locked out. The sound of it was a physical blow. It had the same reedy quality, the same faint tremor of age and illness that it had in her final months. My feet stopped moving of their own accord. Every instinct screamed at me to run toward that sound. She sounded scared. She sounded lost. David, please, it's so cold. I took a half step forward. My hand, holding the flashlight, was shaking. This wasn't a footstep. This wasn't a statue turning. This was a voice I would have given anything to hear again for real. It was a personalized assault. But Rule 13 was absolute. You were the only security personnel on site between the hours of 10 p.m. and 6 a.m. Any other person you see is not real. Did that include voices? It had to. This thing, whatever it was using my grief as a weapon. It was digging into the deepest, rawest part of me and pulling. I just want to come home, David. I closed my eyes. I could see her face, pale against the hospital pillows. I could feel the weight of her hand in mine. The voice was perfect. It was a masterpiece of mimicry. And it was a lie. I forced myself to take a step back, then another. I turned my back on the dead-end corridor and the voice of my dead mother and walked away, increasing my pace as I had for the footsteps. The voice called after me, plaintive, then confused, then with a sharp edge of anger that my mother had never, ever possessed. David, don't you walk away from me. David. I kept walking. I didn't run. I walked with a stiff, mechanical precision until the voice faded into the background hum of the museum, and then into silence. When I re-entered the security office, my uniform shirt was soaked with sweat. I poured a cup of water from the cooler with a hand that wouldn't stop trembling. I had passed the test, but I felt sick. I felt violated. The next night, Shaw was waiting for me when I arrived. He didn't ask how things were going. He just handed me a new sheet of paper. Amendments, he said, his tone grim. Read them. Now. I took the paper. The heading was the same, but the list was new. 1. The voice imitation has been noted. If you hear a voice imitating a loved one, do not respond. Do not even acknowledge it internally. The phenomenon feeds on attention. Proceed with your patrol at your standard pace. Do not run. 2. The 13-minute patrol window is now a 12-minute window. The count begins the moment the exterior office door closes. 3. The man in the brown custodial uniform has been known to offer a specific item, a silver cigarette lighter. Under no circumstances are you to take it from him. If he insists, leave the area immediately and return to the security office, skipping the remainder of your patrol. Log the incident as a brown coat encounter, level 2. 4. The inventory at midnight and 4 a.m. must now include a verification of the salt lines at all exterior doors and the sub-basement entrance. The lines must be unbroken. If a line is broken, you must redraw it from the supply in the janitor-s closet before continuing your inventory. 5. If the number of display cases in the main hall is incorrect and a second count confirms 28, you are to proceed to the security office and initiate a lockdown drill. Instructions for the drill are taped to the underside of the main console. 6. The reflection in the Etruscan dagger S case may now attempt communication. It will mouth words or hold up written messages. Do not read them. Cover the case with the black cloth provided in the supply locker for the remainder of the shift. 7. Your radio checks with dispatch will now require a countersign. I will provide you with the daily phrase. Today S phrase is oak and iron. You will receive the query. Status of the collection. Your response must include that phrase. The collection is secure, oak and iron. Any deviation, or if the dispatcher does not use the correct query, terminate the communication and do not reestablish contact for 30 minutes. I looked up from the amendments. It's getting worse, isn't it? Shaw's face was unreadable. It is adapting. You survived a personalized lure. That means you're a viable long-term prospect. The rules have to adapt with it. He pointed to the amendment about the salt lines. Start that tonight. And remember the countersign. Evans forgot the countersign once. He was never quite the same after. He left me with the new list, my mind reeling. The rules were multiplying, becoming more complex, more demanding. The museum wasn't just a place with strange phenomena. It was a living, reactive system, and I was a variable within it. That night, my patrols felt different. The silence felt more watchful. When I checked the salt line at the service entrance, I saw a faint scuff mark through the white powder, as if something had dragged a toe across it. I got the salt from the closet and carefully redrew the line, my fingers leaving stark white prints on the dark floor. During my midnight patrol, I saw him again. The man in the brown uniform. He was standing by the service elevator, not mopping, just standing. I approached. He turned his head slowly toward me. His face was ordinary, weathered, with deep-set eyes that held no light. He didn't speak. He simply opened his hand. On his palm lay a beautifully crafted silver Zippo lighter, etched with a complex, swirling pattern. Rule 3 of the amendments flashed in my mind. Under no circumstances are you to take it. I shook my head once, a tight, nervous gesture. No, thank you. He continued to hold it out, his expression unchanging. He took a step closer. The service elevator gave a low bing. The doors slid open, revealing the empty, fluorescent-lit interior. Rule 7 from the core list screamed in my head. Do not enter. The man in brown took another step, the lighter still offered. His silence was more threatening than any words. I broke protocol. I turned and walked away, not at an increased pace, but almost at a jog. I skipped the rest of the West Wing, my heart hammering. I didn't stop until I was back in the security office, the door locked securely behind me. I logged it as instructed. Brown coat encounter, level 2. I was no longer just following rules to keep a job. I was following them to survive. The museum was no longer just a building. It was a predator, and its hunger was growing. The siege began on a Thursday, during the 4th week of my employment. The first sign was the weather. A sudden, violent storm rolled in just after midnight, howling around the old building, rattling the window frames in their casements. The lights flickered once, twice, and then died, plunging the security office and the monitor bank into absolute blackness. The emergency generators kicked in with a low rumble that vibrated through the floor. A moment later, a single red emergency light flickered on in the office ceiling, casting the room in a bloody dim glow. The monitors remained dead. I was blind. My radio crackled to life. It was Shaw. His voice was tight, stripped of its usual rumble. Miller, power us down across the grid. This is not a drill. Initiate emergency protocol Sigma. The sheet is in the same drawer. Do it now. I fumbled in the desk drawer, my fingers finding a third, heavier stock piece of paper. I pulled it out. The heading was stark. Emergency protocols for blackout conditions only. 1. You will no longer leave the security office for hourly patrols. Your perimeter is this room. 2. You must maintain a constant, low-frequency hum. The pitch is not important, but the vibration is. Do not stop for more than 10 seconds at a time. 3. Every 5 minutes, you will shine your flashlight directly into the fisheye lens of the door and see peephole for a full 30 seconds. 4. The door must be reinforced with the steel crossbar stored in the corner. Once the bar is in place, it is not to be removed until dawn or until the all clear is given by me personally, with the code phrase, "The sun is over the yardarm." 5. You will inventory your remaining supplies batteries, water, food, and report the counts to me on the hour. Conserve everything. This was a new level of nightmare. I scrambled to follow the instructions. The steel crossbar was heavy, slotting into brackets on either side of the reinforced door with 2 solid, satisfying clangs. I started to hum, a low, monotonous note from the back of my throat. It made me feel ridiculous, but the vibration was a tangible thing in the small, red-lit room. The first hour was a study in tense repetition. Shine the light through the peephole. See nothing but the empty, dark corridor. Inventory my 2 spare radio batteries, my half-full bottle of water, the protein bar in my pocket. The storm raged outside, a symphony of wind and lashing rain. But soon, another sound joined it, a scratching at the door. It was a light, skittering sound, like a dog wanting to be let in. It would start near the bottom, then move up to the height of the handle. I shone the light through the peephole. Nothing. The scratching continued, more insistent. Then the knocking started. A single, sharp rap. Then silence. Then 2 raps. Then 3. It was a pattern, one I instinctively knew not to acknowledge. Rule 3 from the core list, amplified. Don't acknowledge a second knock. This was a symphony of knocks. My radio crackled. Miller, status. It was Shaw. Supplies nominal. Situation active, I said, my voice tight around the constant hum I was maintaining. Hold the line, he said, and the transmission cut out. The knocking ceased. For a long, beautiful moment, there was only the sound of the storm and my own low hum. Then a new sound began. A voice from the other side of the door. It was the dispatcher's voice, a woman named Carol I spoke to twice a night. Miller, come in. We're showing a fault in your door seal sensor. Can you confirm the crossbar is properly engaged? We need you to remove it for a diagnostic reset. It sounded just like her. The same slight nasal quality, the same professional cadence, but we had to done a radio check-in over an hour. And the rule was clear. The all clear could only come from Shaw with the specific code. This was a trap, a sophisticated, cruel trap. I didn't answer. I kept humming. Miller, do you copy? This is a priority 1 request. Remove the crossbar and open the door for visual inspection. I pressed the transmit button on my radio, holding it close to my mouth, and continued my hum directly into the microphone. I let the low, droning vibration be my only response. There was a burst of static from the other side of the door, and the voice changed. It was no longer Carol. It was a hiss of pure static and fury. The scratching returned, fiercer now, like metal on metal. Then the door handle began to jiggle, slowly at first, then with violent, frantic turns. The steel crossbar held firm. I stood in the center of the room, humming, shining my light at the peephole in 5-minute intervals, my world shrunk to this single, red-lit room and the thing trying to get in. The assault on the door lasted for what felt like hours. The knocking, the scratching, the mimicked voices. First Carol, then Shaw, then my mother again. It used every trick, every vulnerability it had learned from me. I hummed until my throat was raw. I drank sparingly from my water bottle. I never once answered. I never once stopped the ritual. Sometime near what I guessed was 4 a.m, the activity ceased. The silence that followed was more terrifying than the noise. It was a waiting silence. I performed my flashlight ritual, and this time, when I looked through the peephole, I saw something. A shape standing at the far end of the corridor, just at the edge of the red emergency light's reach. It was the man in the brown custodial uniform. He was just standing there, looking directly at the door, at me. In his hand, the silver lighter flickered open and closed, casting a tiny, dancing orange light on his impassive face. He stood there, unmoving, for the next 20 minutes, until the first gray light of dawn began to filter through the high, barred windows of the corridor outside. The storm had passed. The power returned with a sudden, deafening hum. The monitors blinking back to life, showing empty, peaceful halls. The red light in the ceiling switched off, replaced by the sterile white of the fluorescents. My radio crackled. "Miller, report." It was Shaw. He sounded exhausted. "I am here," I croaked, my voice wrecked from humming. "The sun is over the yardarm," he said. I nearly wept with relief. I unbarred the door, my muscles screaming in protest, and opened it a crack. The corridor was empty. The man in brown was gone. There were no scratches on the heavy metal door, no marks of any kind. It was as if the entire night had been a hallucination born of stress and storm. But I knew it wasn't he. I walked my final patrol at 6 a.m. in a daze. The museum was pristine. The weeping woman faced east. The main hall had 27 cases. The salt lines were intact. Everything was in its right place, as if nothing had ever happened. As I was leaving, Shaw met me at the service entrance. He handed me an envelope, my pay in cash, as always. He looked older than he had just 12 hours before. "You did well," he said, his voice a gravelly whisper. "It tested you. You held." "What was that?" I asked, the question I had been holding for weeks finally breaking free. "What is in this place?" Shaw shook his head. "It is not a what, it's a condition, a set of parameters. This building sits at a junction. The rules are the only thing that keeps the parameters stable. Follow the rules and you stabilize the system. Break them and you introduce chaos. You saw a taste of that chaos last night." He looked at me, and for the first time, I saw something like pity in his eyes. "Get some sleep, Miller. Your shift starts again at 10. I didn't quit. The debt was still there, a cold, hard fact in my bank statements. But more than that, I had passed the test. I had looked into the chaos and survived by clinging to the rules. There was a terrible, twisted pride in that. Weeks turned into a month, then 2. I became a model of compliance. My movements were precise, my timings exact. I could feel the museum-esque moods in the shift of the air, the quality of the silence. The anomalies became routine, just another part of the job. The footsteps, the shifted statue, the cold spot, they were data points, not threats. I had mastered the environment, which is why I noticed the change immediately. It was a small thing during my 2 a.m. patrol. A new rule had to be added to the amendments after the blackout concerning the service elevator. It now stated that if the elevator chimed and the doors opened on any floor, other than the basement, you were to place a single copper token from the supply locker on the floor of the car before pressing the close door button. I had done this 3 times without incident. On this night, the elevator chimed as I passed it on the 2nd floor. The doors slid open. The car was empty. I reached into my pocket for the copper token, a small, cool disc about the size of a quarter, and bent to place it on the threshold. That S when I saw it. A single, fresh scratch on the interior wall of the elevator, right next to the control panel. It was about 4 inches long, thin and sharp, like a mark from a nail, and it was new. I was sure of it. I did my inventory. I noticed details. This was new. I placed the token and pressed the close button. The doors slid shut. I stood there for a moment, frowning. Then I continued my patrol, pushing the thought away. It was probably nothing. Maybe a piece of equipment had scraped it during the day. The next night, there were 2 more scratches, parallel to the first. The night after that, a small dark smudge on the floor that smelled faintly of ozone and burnt hair. I reported it to Shaw in my log. Service elevator showing signs of interior wear. Smudge on floor, panel scratched. He didn't respond. A week later, the real event began. I was in the security office watching the monitors. The feed for the 2nd floor corridor, the one that showed the service elevator, flickered. It went to static for exactly 3 seconds, then returned. When it came back, a figure was standing in front of the elevator doors. It was a man, his back to the camera. He was wearing a navy blue security uniform. My uniform. He stood perfectly still. Then slowly, he raised his right hand and began to scratch at the metal elevator door. The sound didn't come through the audio, but I could see the motion, a slow, deliberate drag of fingernails against steel. My blood ran cold. Rule 13. You are the only security personnel on site. I grabbed the radio. Shaw, come in. Go ahead, Miller. I have a visual on a hostel on the 2nd floor. Corridor B. It Hess, mimicking my appearance. There was a long pause. Describe its actions. It S, scratching at the service elevator door. Do not engage. Shaw's voice was sharp, urgent. Do not leave the office. Lock the door if you haven't already. This is an echo event. It S trying to bait you into a confrontation. It S learned that indirect methods won't work. I watched the screen. The thing the echo stopped scratching. It turned its head, just slightly, as if it had heard us. It couldn't have. The office was soundproofed, but the movement was unnervingly deliberate. Then it turned and walked away, down the corridor and out of the camera's view. For the next 3 nights, the echo appeared on the monitors. It never did anything overtly threatening. It would walk a patrol route, but in reverse. It would stand in Gallery 3 and look at the weeping woman. It would count the display cases in the main hall, its lips moving silently. It was studying. It was learning my routines. The tension was unbearable. It was one thing to follow rules about abstract phenomena. It was another to see a doppelganger of yourself walking the halls. A living, breathing representation of a broken rule. My sleep during the day became fitful, haunted by dreams of myself wandering endless dark corridors. The breaking point came on a quiet, unremarkable Tuesday. I was on my midnight patrol, moving through the hall of antiquities. The cold was, as always, biting. I was halfway through the hall when I heard the service elevator chime, a distant, cheerful sound that was utterly out of place. It came from the wrong direction. The elevator was on the other side of the building. I froze, listening. Then I heard it. the sound of footsteps approaching from the direction of the grand foyer. They were the same cadence as my own, the same weight. I looked down the long hall. A figure turned the corner and stepped into the far entrance. It was me. The echo was perfect. The same uniform, the same height, the same way of carrying the heavy keys in my left hand. Its face was my face, but blank, expressionless, like a mask. It stopped and stood there, looking at me from 50 feet away. Every instinct told me to run, to challenge it, to do something. But the rules were silent on this specific scenario. I had no procedure. I was paralyzed. The echo began to walk toward me. Its steps were slow, measured. It didn't speak. It just closed the distance, 40 feet, 30 feet. I could see the stitching on its uniform, the scuff on its left boot. I could see the empty, depthless quality of its eyes. It was 20 feet away when a voice crackled from my radio, so loud it made me jump. "Miller, Rule 8. Now, it was Shaw, screaming. Rule 8. Your radio may pick up a transmission on channel 4 that sounds like a child singing. Change the channel immediately. Do not listen to the song. I didn't hear a child singing. But I acted on pure conditioned reflex. My hand flew to the dial on my radio and twisted it from channel 1 to channel 4. There was a burst of high-pitched, discordant static. The echo, 10 feet away now, flinched. It was a small, almost imperceptible twitch, but it was there. Its blank expression fractured for a microsecond, revealing something beneath a ripple of annoyance, of pain. "Channel 6!" Shaw yelled. I twisted the dial again, more static, a lower frequency. The echo stopped. It raised a hand, not in threat, but almost in a gesture of warding. Then it turned and walked away, its pace still measured, back down the hall and around the corner, out of sight. I stood there, trembling, the radio hissing in my hand. I had found a flaw, a vulnerability. The radio frequencies, the structured noise, disrupted it. I leaned against a display case, my legs weak, and took several deep, ragged breaths. I had survived another breach, not by running, but by following a rule that shouldn't have even applied. When I got back to the office, there was a new amendment waiting, slipped under the door. 1. The echo is vulnerable to broadcast disruption. If you encounter it, switch your radio through channels 4, 6, and 2 in sequence. Do not use channel 1 during an encounter. 2. It is attempting to learn the rules. It must not be allowed to witness the salt line verification or the 2:10 a.m. faucet ritual. 3. If you see it approaching the sub-basement door, you are authorized to break silence and shout a single word: away. This is a last resort. The war was no longer between me and the museum. It was between me and a reflection of myself that was trying to learn how to break the world. The next person, I thought, with a cold clarity that had nothing to do with the Hall of Antiquities. The next person will need to know this. The night I found the sub-basement door unlocked was the night I knew my time was coming to an end. It was my final shift of the week, and a profound, weary stillness had settled over the museum. The air was thick and cold, the kind of cold that seeps into your bones and makes a home there. My patrols had become a grim, automatic ballet. I was no longer David Miller, a man with debts and a past. I was a function, a set of compliant actions. It was during my 3 a.m. patrol that I saw it. The sub-basement door, a featureless slab of reinforced steel, set in an alcove near the boiler room, was usually just a part of the background. I checked its salt line, as per the amendment, and noted it was intact. But as I turned to leave, a sliver of darkness caught my eye. The door was ajar. open by maybe half an inch. Rule 14 from the core list screamed in my mind. Under no circumstances are you to enter the sub-basement. The door is marked. It is always locked. If you find it unlocked, do not touch it. Radio me immediately, regardless of the hour. My hand went to my radio. My thumb hovered over the transmit button. And then I saw it. Lying on the floor, just in front of the door, was a small, white rectangle. A business card. I shouldn't have picked it up. I knew that. But a lifetime of conditioned curiosity overrode the newer, more desperate conditioning of the rules. I bent down and picked it up. It was cheap, cardstock. The printing was slightly blurred. It read, Alistair Finch, Acquisitions Logistics. And below that, a phone number with an old city prefix. It was the card of the man who had hired me. Why was it here? Now. I looked at the door. The darkness beyond the crack was absolute. It didn't look like a place. It looked like a negation, a void. And from that void, a sound began to emanate. It was the soft, rhythmic sound of a pencil scratched on paper. It was a familiar, almost comforting sound. It was the sound my mother used to make, doing her crossword puzzles in the last year of her life when she was too tired for conversation, but wanted the company of sound. I took a step back. This was the ultimate lure. It was a voice calling my name. It was a memory of peace, of safety. It was a sound from a time before the debt, before the sickness, before this God-forsaken museum. My radio crackled, but he wouldn't shaw. It was a burst of garbled noise, and within it, I could just make out a phrase, repeated in a panicked whisper I recognized as Evans' voice, the man I had replaced. The patterns. You have to break the patterns. It learns from the rules. Then it cut out. I stood there, trapped between the absolute command of Rule 14 and the terrifying personal pull of that scratching sound. I looked at the business card in my hand. Acquisitions Logistics. Shaw had never mentioned Finch. The hiring agent had been a woman named Brenda. Was this part of the game? A final, sophisticated trick? Or was it a clue, a piece of the lore I had been so carefully denied? In the end, it was the procedures that saved me. Not the rule itself, but the habit of compliance. I did not touch the door. I did not peer through the crack. I backed away, slowly, until I was 20 yards down the corridor. Then I raised my radio. Shaw, sub-basement door is ajar. I repeat, the door is unlocked. There was no immediate response, only silence. The scratching from behind the door stopped. The silence that replaced it was worse. Finally, his voice came through, thin and strained. Acknowledged. Return to the security office. Now. Do not finish your patrol. Do not stop for anything. I went. I didn't run. I walked with a steady, even pace, my back to the terrifying unlocked door and the memory of my mother's crossword puzzles. I did not look back. When I arrived, Shaw was already there. His face was ashen. He didn't speak. He just walked past me and down the hall, a large, old-fashioned key in his hand. I watched him on the monitor as he approached the sub-basement door. He didn't hesitate. He slammed it shut with his shoulder, the boom echoing faintly through the audio feed, and turned the key. He then took a pouch of salt from his pocket and meticulously redrew the line. He returned to the office 5 minutes later. He looked at me, and for the first time, I saw something like respect in his eyes, mixed with a deep, bottomless sorrow. "You didn't look," he said. "No, you didn't go in." "No." He nodded slowly. "Then you were ready." "Ready for what?" "To take over," he said. He rubbed a hand over his face. "My time is up, Miller. The stress, it gets to you. I've held the line for 12 years. I can do it anymore. You're the first one since me who's lasted more than a few months. You're the first one who didn't break when it showed you your mother. The revelation hit me with the force of a physical blow. This wasn't just a job, it was a succession, a sentence. What happens if I say no? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Then the next person won to have your experience. They'll break, and if they break, the parameters fail. The chaos you saw during the blackout, that will be nothing. It will leak out, Miller, beyond these walls. He looked at me, his gaze steady. You've seen the way it learns, the echo. It is getting smarter because it's been studying you. It needs a new warden, a stronger set of rules. I thought of my empty apartment, the final notice bill's ID shoved in a drawer. There was nothing for me out there. This place, with all its horrors, had become my purpose. I had become a master of its insane logic. What about Finch? I asked, holding out the business card. Shaw took it, glanced at it, and a grim smile touched his lips. Alistair Finch, the founder. He's been dead for 40 years. He pocketed the card. It is trying new things, offering promotions. I sat down in the chair, the familiar creak of the leather, a sound of home. Dawn was beginning to lighten the sky outside, the monitors showing the halls in a soft pre-morning gray. I'll need a raise, I said. Shaw actually laughed, a short barking sound. I'll see what I can do. He spent the next hour walking me through the deeper logistics. The cash payments came from a trust fund Finch had set up. The paperwork was handled by a law firm that asked no questions. There were other documents, older ones, handwritten logs from previous wardens going back a century, detailing the evolution of the rules. I was now the custodian of all of it. When Shaw left that morning, he didn't say goodbye. He just handed me the master key, a heavy iron thing, and nodded. The rules are your life now, Miller. Make them your legacy. The door closed, the lock engaged. I was alone. I spent my first day as the new Shaw organizing the knowledge. I took the core list, the amendments, the emergency protocols, and the notes from the blackout and the Echo event, and I began to compile them into a single, coherent document. I clarified language. I added the new countermeasures for the Echo. I specified that the radio disruption technique took precedence over all other rules during an encounter. I wrote it all down in a clean, precise hand in a new logbook I found in the drawer. My first act as the warden was to add a new rule, born from my own experience. I placed it at the top of the list. Rule 0. You are the warden. The rules are your primary tool and your only weapon. Your belief is irrelevant. Your compliance is absolute. You are now a part of the collection. Preserve it. That night, at 10 p.m., I heard a car pull up outside. I watched from the monitor as a young woman got out, her shoulders hunched against the cold, a look of weary determination on her face. She walked up to the service entrance and knocked. I picked up the uniform shirt from the locker. It was a new one, crisp and blue. I put it on. The name over the pocket read, H.A. Harris. I took the key, the flashlight, and the radio. I picked up the logbook containing the rules I had refined and expanded. I walked to the service door and unlocked it. The young woman looked up at me, her eyes wide with a mixture of anxiety and hope. Ms. Harris, I said, my voice calm, steady, and devoid of all warmth. I'm Miller. Come inside. There are things you need to know. I stepped back to let her in. The door felt heavier than usual as I pushed it shut, the lock engaging with a sound like a final verdict. The young woman, Harris, stood shivering in the foyer, her eyes darting around, taking in the high ceiling, the dim sconces, the deep shadows. She clutched a small duffel bag to her chest like a shield. "Locker room is this way," I said, my voice echoing in the cavernous space. I led her without waiting, my footsteps measured and sure on the checkered floor. I could feel her hesitation as she followed a few paces behind. I knew what she was seeing, a man in a crisp uniform, calm, in control. She had no idea that the calm was a layer of ice over a bottomless lake of dread. I showed her Locker 8. Inside hung the same navy blue shirt, her name already stitched above the pocket. Her eyes widened at the sight. How? "It is part of the process," I said, cutting her off. I had no time for her confusion. The rules were already ticking in the back of my mind. A countdown to the first patrol. Change. Then meet me in the security office. We don't have much time. I left her there and returned to the monitors. The weeping woman was facing east. The main hall had 27 cases. The service elevator readout showed it was on the basement level, dormant. All parameters were stable. For now. Harris appeared a few minutes later, the uniform shirt baggy on her slender frame. She looked younger out of her street clothes, more vulnerable. The hiring agent said it was a quiet job she started, her voice a little too bright. "It is," I interrupted, turning from the monitors to face her. "As long as you were precise." I saw the same skepticism ID once had flicker across her face. I didn't try to argue with it. Experience would be her only true teacher. I handed her the keys, the flashlight, the radio. Then I picked up the master logbook, the one I had spent the day compiling. "This is the addendum," I said, handing it to her. "Read it, now. You have until your first patrol at 11 to memorize the core principles." She took the book, her fingers tracing the embossed cover. She opened it. I watched her eyes scan the first page, where I had written Rule 0 in bold, block letters. Her brow furrowed. She looked up at me, a question forming on her lips. "No questions," I said, my tone leaving no room for argument. "Just read. Your life depends on your understanding of what is in that book." I turned back to the console, giving her the illusion of privacy. I heard the soft rustle of pages as she turned them. I heard her sharp, indrawn breath when she reached Rule 4, about the weeping woman. A soft, disbelieving laugh escaped her when she read Rule 13. "You are the only security personnel on site." I didn't react. I simply watched the clock. It was 10:47. At 10:59, I turned to her. "Time for your first patrol. The route is mapped in the book. Follow it exactly. The rules are your map. Do not deviate." She stood, looking pale but resolute. She clipped the radio to her belt, her movements clumsy with nervousness. What if I see something?" "You will," I said. "And when you do, you will consult the book. Not your instincts. The book. Now go." She nodded, a tight, jerky motion, and unlocked the office door. She gave me one last, uncertain look before stepping out into the corridor. The door swung shut and the lock clicked home. I was alone again, but the dynamic had shifted. I was no longer just the subject of the rules. I was their enforcer, their guardian. I watched her on the monitors. She moved cautiously through the grand foyer, her head on a swivel. She was counting the display cases. Good. She entered the Hall of Antiquities, and I saw her hug herself against the cold. She didn't look at the thermostat. Also good. My radio crackled. It was Shaw. His voice was a ghost on the line, faint and strained. "Miller, she's the one. The background check, she's Evans' niece. She doesn't know. The news landed in my gut like a stone. Evans, the man who had taken a sudden leave of absence, the man who had forgotten the countersign. The museum hadn't just chosen a random replacement. It had chosen a legacy, a vulnerability. Understood, I said, my voice flat. Be careful, Miller. It knows. It always knows. The transmission died. I looked at the monitor showing the Greek gallery. Harris was there, walking slowly past the statues. She paused in front of Apollo, her head tilted. Don't to look at their faces for too long, I thought, a silent plea. Just keep moving. She moved on into the West Wing. The motion sensor for that sector blipped on my console. I ignored it. She would have to learn to do the same. I watched her progress, a tiny figure moving through the labyrinth of history and horror. She was on schedule. She reached Gallery 3. I switched to the camera feed for that room. She entered. The weeping woman was facing east. Harris noted it, her lips moving, as she confirmed the orientation. She began her circuit of the room. My fingers tightened on the edge of the console. This was the first real test. She turned her back on the statue to examine a case of Fabergé eggs. When she turned back, the statue had shifted. It was now facing the western archway. I saw her freeze. Her body went rigid. She stared at the dark basalt figure, her face a mask of disbelief and dawning fear. This was the moment. Would she follow the procedure or would she run? For a long, terrible second, she did nothing. Then, with a visible effort that I could feel even through the grainy video feed, she turned and walked back out the eastern archway. She disappeared from the camera's view. I held my breath. Had she broken? Was she fleeing back to the office? A moment later, she reappeared in the doorway. She stopped, cleared her throat twice. The sound was picked up by the room's sensitive microphone, a dry, scared rasp. She stood there, waiting. The statue did not move. After a 10 count, she turned and hurried out the western archway, completing her patrol. I let out a slow breath. She had passed. She had followed the rule, even though it felt insane. When she re-entered the security office, her face was pale, but there was a new light in her eyes, not of understanding, but of a grim determination. It moved, she whispered. It does that, I said. You handled it correctly. What is it? She asked, her voice trembling. What is this place? I met her gaze. It's a job, Harris. A job with rules. That's all you need to know. I pointed to the logbook on the desk where she'd left it. Review the amendments. Your next patrol is at midnight. It will include the supply inventory and the salt line verification. I turned away, effectively ending the conversation. I could feel her confusion, her need for answers. But answers were a luxury I could not afford to give her. Belief could not be taught. It had to be earned through survived terror. She was Evans' blood. The museum would test that connection mercilessly. My job was not to comfort her. My job was to make sure she was still standing at 6 a.m. The rest of the night unfolded with a tense predictability. Harris performed her duties with a dogged, terrified precision. She completed the midnight inventory, her hands shaking as she counted the batteries and verified the unbroken salt lines. She jumped at every distant sound. During her 2 a.m. patrol, she reported hearing faint footsteps in the West Wing, and I heard the increase in her pace over the radio static as she obeyed Rule 3. It was during the 3 a.m. patrol that the museum made its first real move against her new vulnerability. I was monitoring her progress on the second floor when my radio buzzed. It was Harris. Her breathing was quick, panicked. Miller there's a man down here in a brown uniform. He says he's offering me something. Rule 11, Harris, I said, my voice cold steel. Refuse politely but firmly. I did, but he's not listening. He's holding out his hand. It's a pocket watch, a silver one. It looks old. A pocket watch, not the lighter. It had changed the lure. It was probing her. He's saying it belonged to my uncle, that he wanted me to have it. My blood went cold. Evans. It was using Evans. Harris, listen to me. Do not take it. That is not your uncle's watch. It is a trap. Leave the area. Now. Return to the office. But he's saying my name. He knows my name. Now, Harris. I barked into the radio. I watched on the monitor as she backed away from the figure of the man in brown. He stood perfectly still, his arm extended, the silver watch glinting in the dim light. Harris turned and almost ran down the corridor, her figure disappearing from one camera's view and appearing on the next. The man in brown did not follow. He simply stood there, holding the watch, a patient fisherman with a new, tempting bait on his hook. She burst into the security office, slamming the door shut and leaning against it, her chest heaving. How did he know? She gasped. About my uncle? I didn't answer. I simply pointed to the logbook. Read the new amendment, the one about personalized item offers. Log the encounter as a brown coat encounter, level 3. Specify the item was a timepiece. She stared at me, her eyes begging for an explanation I would not give. After a moment, she slumped into the chair and began to write in the log, her handwriting jagged and uneven. The rest of her shift passed in a tense silence. She was jumpy, looking over her shoulder, even within the supposed safety of the office. The museum had found a crack. It was only a matter of time before it started to pry. When her relief, a tired-looking day guard, arrived at 6 a.m., Harris looked like she had aged 10 years. She handed over the equipment without a word and practically fled the building. I watched her go from the office window. She had survived her first night, but the war for her soul had just begun. My work was not done. I sat down at the desk and opened the logbook to a fresh page. I picked up a pen. Amendment 8, I wrote. The entity known as the Man in Brown will now likely utilize sentimental attachments related to former personnel. All offers of heirlooms or personal effects are to be considered a level 3 threat. The recommended response is immediate disengagement and radio silence for the remainder of the patrol segment. I closed the book. The rules were evolving. I was evolving with them. I was no longer just the warden. I was the architect of the next line of defense. Harris would be back tonight, more frightened, more hardened, and the museum would be waiting. I looked at the monitor showing the sub-basement door. It was closed, locked, the salt line pristine. For now, the parameters were stable. I had held the line for another night. But as I sat in the creeping dawn light, the master key heavy in my pocket, I knew the quiet was just another kind of lie. The chaos was always there, waiting for its turn. The silence after Harris left was different. It wasn't the empty quiet of my own shifts, but a watchful, waiting stillness. The museum was processing her. It had tasted her fear, her connection to Evans, and it was hungry for more. I spent the day in the office, my sleep a fractured series of naps on the worn leather couch, my dreams filled with the sound of scratching pencils and the sight of a silver pocket watch swinging on a chain. When I awoke properly, the sun was low in the sky. I performed my own pre-shift rituals with a new gravity. I checked the salt lines myself, finding the one at the service entrance slightly smudged, as if by a trailing foot. I redrew it, the white grains a stark line against the dark floor. I inventoried the supplies, noting we were low on copper tokens for the elevator. I added it to the requisition list, a mundane task that felt vitally important. Harris arrived 10 minutes early. She looked like she hadn't slept. Dark circles hung under her eyes, and the nervous energy from the previous night had been replaced by a brittle wariness. "Anything to report?" she asked, her voice hoarse. "The parameters are stable," I said, avoiding her question. I handed her the updated logbook, open to the new amendment I had written about the man in brown. "Review this. Your Uncle S' name was Evans. The museum knows this. It will use it against you. You must not let it." She read the amendment, her face paling further. "How does it know?" "It learns," I said simply. "It learns from our weaknesses. Your weakness is your grief. Your strength is the book. Remember that." Her first patrol was uneventful, a tense, silent affair, monitored through the flickering screens. She moved like a ghost through the halls, her head constantly swiveling, expecting an attack at every corner. The predictability of it was its own kind of torture. The weeping woman turned, and she performed the re-entry ritual. The footsteps followed her in the west wing, and she increased her pace. She was learning the dance. The true test came during her 2 a.m. patrol. I was watching the feed from the Hall of Antiquities when I saw it. A flicker. Not on the screen itself, but in the room. One of the glass display cases, the one housing a collection of Bronze Age torques, seemed to shimmer. The air around it wavered like heat haze on a summer road. Harris was just entering the hall. She felt it immediately. I saw her steps falter as the unnatural cold of the room intensified, frosting the glass of the cases. Her breath plumed thickly in the air. And then, from the shimmering space around the torques, a voice emerged. It was a man's voice, rough with age and what sounded like desperation. "Hannah? Hannah, is that you?" "It's me, your Uncle Mark." Harris froze. Her entire body went rigid. She hadn't told me her first name. The voice was using it. "Hannah, you have to help me. I'm not gone. I'm stuck. I am in the dark. Please." It was a masterpiece of mimicry. It captured a familial warmth, a pleading need that was designed to bypass logic and go straight for the heart. I saw her hand twitch toward her radio. She was fighting it. "Dante, listen, Harris," I said into my own radio, my voice low and urgent. "It's a lie. Rule 13. You are alone." The voice from the hall ignored me, as if it couldn't hear my transmission. "They told you I left, didn't they?" "They lied, Hannah. Shaw and that new one, Miller. They locked me in. I'm in the sub-basement. The door, you have to open the door." My blood ran cold. It wasn't just using Evans's memory. It was using the specific, recent terror of the unlocked door. It was weaving a narrative, a plausible conspiracy designed to turn her against me, against the rules. "Harris, disengage," I commanded. "Leave the hall. Now." She didn't move. She was staring at the shimmering air, her face a battleground of doubt and horror. "Uncle Mark?" she whispered, the name torn from her. "Yes, honey, it's me. Please, you have to believe me. Miller has the key. He has the master key. Get it from him. Let me out." This was a direct incitement to breach Rule 14. It was trying to make her an active agent of chaos. I stood up, my hand gripping the radio so hard the plastic creaked. "Harris, that is an order. Move your feet. Now." My voice, sharp and loud over the radio, seemed to break the spell. She flinched, took a stumbling step back, then another. She tore her eyes away from the shimmering case and ran, bursting out of the Hall of Antiquities and into the main corridor. On the camera, I saw the shimmer around the torques slowly fade, the voice falling silent. She didn't return to the office. She completed her patrol, a frantic half run through the remaining galleries, and arrived back at 12 minutes and 10 seconds early. She stood outside the office door, waiting for the 13-minute mark, her body trembling as she stared at the blank wood. When she finally entered, she didn't look at me. She went straight to the logbook and began writing, her pen digging into the paper. "Report," I said, my tone neutral. "Auditory hallucination in the Hall of Antiquities," she said, her voice flat, imitating a relative. I disengaged. She was using the clinical language of the log, building a wall of procedure between herself and the horror. "Good," I said. It was the only praise I could offer. That night, after she left, I added another amendment. The phenomenon is capable of constructing complex, personalized narratives designed to undermine authority and encourage the breaching of primary rules, specifically Rule 14. These narratives are to be treated as a Level 4 psychological threat. The recommended response is immediate physical disengagement and a mandatory post-shift debriefing. The debriefing was a new concept. I knew I couldn't leave her to process this alone. The museum would use her isolation as a weapon. The next few nights were a cold war. Harris became quieter, more withdrawn, but also more precise. Her movements were robotic, her adherence to the rules absolute. She was building her own fortress, brick by brick, out of procedure. The museum, in turn, shifted its tactics. The direct, personal lures diminished. Instead, it began a campaign of psychological pressure. Lights would flicker in sequences that almost formed patterns. The radio would pick up fragments of music that sounded like distorted lullabies. The number of floor tiles in a hallway would seem to change by one between one patrol and the next, only to be correct when she double-checked. It was a constant, low-level gaslighting designed to erode her sense of reality and fray her nerves. It culminated on a night of heavy fog that seeped under the doors and pressed against the windows, muffling the outside world. Harris was on her midnight patrol when I noticed it on the monitors. A shadow. It wasn't cast by anything on camera. It was just there, a patch of deeper darkness that slid along the wall of the grand foyer, keeping pace with her, just at the edge of the frame. It was the echo. It was back, but it had changed. It was no longer trying to mimic me. It was formless, a stalking silhouette. I didn't warn her. A warning would only feed her fear. I watched, my heart a cold stone, as the shadow followed her from room to room. It never entered the camera frame she was in, always staying in the adjacent one, a persistent, silent witness. Harris, focused on her counts and her checks, seemed unaware. It was in the West Wing that it made its move. The motion sensor alert, which we both ignored, blipped. A moment later, the lights in the West Wing corridor flickered and died, plunging it into darkness. Harris's flashlight beam cut a frantic swath through the black. Miller, her voice was a tight whisper over the radio. "Lights are out in the West Wing. Acknowledge." "Acknowledge," I said, my voice calm, though my knuckles were white on the console. "Proceed with your patrol. Use your flashlight. Maintain your pace." I watched her light beam dance erratically on the monitor. The shadow was no longer on the adjacent camera. It was in the corridor with her. I could just make it out, a coalescence of darkness that drank the light from her flashlight, trailing a few yards behind. It was her own shadow, divorced from her body and given a malevolent life of its own. Miller, I think there's something behind me. Her whisper was fraying at the edges. Do not turn around, I commanded, the core rule now a lifeline. Increase your pace. You are nearly at the end of the corridor. I saw her speed up, the flashlight beam jouncing. The shadow kept perfect pace, an impossible stretching silhouette on the wall that grew denser, more solid with every step. It was hurting her. It was trying to spook her into a run, into a breach of protocol. Then her radio and mine crackled with a new sound. It was the sound of her own voice, but distorted, slowed down and thick with static. Help me, Uncle Mark, let me out. It was a recording, a playback of her whispered words from the Hall of Antiquities. The museum was weaponizing her own moment of weakness. On the monitor, I saw her stumble, a sob catching in her throat. The shadow loomed closer, its form beginning to suggest something long, thin limbs, a head that lolled at an unnatural angle. It was no longer just a shadow. It was becoming a thing. Harris, I barked into the radio. Channel 4, now. The order cut through her panic. Her free hand fumbled at her radio. She twisted the dial. The moment it clicked to Channel 4, the distorted playback of her voice cut out, replaced by a shriek of high-frequency static. On the monitor, the advancing shadow flinched, its form rippling like smoke. Channel 6, I yelled. She switched again. A lower guttural static filled the airwaves. The shadow recoiled, pulling back from her, its form losing definition. Keep switching. 4, 6, 2, in sequence. She became a machine of compliance. 4, 6, 2, 4, 6, 2. The radio in her hand spat and snarled with disruptive noise. The shadow writhed, unable to maintain its cohesion against the broadcast assault. It dissolved into patches of murk that faded into the corners of the corridor as Harris, still switching channels, finally reached the well-lit safety of the connecting hall. She slammed the door shut behind her, leaning against it, gasping. When she returned to the office, she was shaking uncontrollably. She didn't speak. She just looked at me, her eyes holding a question that had gone beyond words. She had faced a new form of the terror and the rules. The bizarre radio procedure had saved her. The foundation of her reality was being systematically dismantled and rebuilt according to the logbook's insane logic. I made her a cup of sweet, terrible coffee from the office machine. We sat in silence as she drank it, the only sound the hum of the monitors and the occasional staticky burst from the radios as they reset. It used my voice, she finally said, her voice hollow. It uses everything, I replied. It learns. Now you know. The radio disruption works on more than just the echo. It disrupts manifestation. She nodded slowly, absorbing this new critical piece of data. It was no longer abstract. It was a tool, a weapon. The rest of her shift was quiet. The museum, having failed in its direct assault, had withdrawn to regroup. When she left at dawn, she looked less like a victim and more like a soldier returning from the front lines, exhausted, traumatized, but hardened. After she was gone, I opened the logbook. My hand was steady as I wrote. Amendment 9. The entity known as the Shadow is a variant of the Echo, capable of exploiting darkness and auditory mimicry. It is highly susceptible to multi-frequency radio disruption. The sequence for shadow encounters is channel 4, 6, 2, repeated until the phenomenon dissipates. Do not attempt to observe it directly. I closed the book. The fog outside was beginning to burn away under the weak morning sun. The museum was quiet, but I could feel it thinking, planning. It had tested Harris's resolve with direct personal attacks and with psychological terror. She had weathered both. It would have to try something new, something that didn't just test her compliance, but her very will to remain. The next night, it began. It started subtly. A patrol that should have taken 11 minutes and 40 seconds took her 12 minutes flat. She reported nothing unusual, but I saw on the maps she had drawn that the corridor leading to the Greek gallery seemed to have lengthened just by a few paces. The following night, the journey through the Hall of Antiquities took 20 seconds less than usual, the familiar cold seeming to recede before her, urging her forward. The museum was warping space around her, subtly altering the geometry of her world. It was a slow, insidious pressure designed to make her doubt her own senses, her own timing. She began to double-check her watch against the atomic clock display in the office, her brow furrowed in concentration. Then, on the third night of this subtle warping, she came back from her 1 a.m. patrol, looking deeply unsettled. "The weeping woman," she said, her voice tight. She was different. Different how? She was standing. I stared at her. The weeping woman was a kneeling figure. It had always been a kneeling figure. It was one of the constants. Explain. I entered the gallery. She was facing east, as always, but she was upright, on her feet. Her hands weren't over her face. They were at her sides. Harris swallowed hard, and she was smiling. Rule 6 flashed in my mind. If any of the classical statues in the Greek exhibit appear to be smiling, leave the gallery immediately. But this was Gallery 3. This was a different rule set. And the weeping woman did not smile. She wept. "What did you do?" I asked, my voice dangerously calm. I didn't know what to do. The rule for her is about which way she faces. There is no rule for that. So I performed the re-entry ritual. I went out and came back in, cleared my throat. And when I came back in, she was kneeling again, facing east, as if nothing had happened. This was a fundamental breach of the museum's own internal logic. It was changing the constants. It was telling us that the rules we relied on were not laws of nature, but merely a temporary truce that it could revoke at any time. The message was clear. Your safety is an illusion I allow. That was the night I started sleeping in the office. The worn leather couch became my bed. I couldn't leave Harris alone in this escalating war. The museum was no longer just testing its new warden. It was testing the limits of the system I had inherited. My presence was a statement. I was the bedrock. I would not be moved. A week later, the final assault began. It was a Tuesday. The air in the museum was thick and heavy, pressing down like a physical weight. Harris was on her 10 p.m. patrol, her first of the night. I was tracking her on the monitors when I saw a flicker on the feed from the sub-basement door. The camera was mounted down the hall, giving a clear view of the reinforced steel door and the alcove it sat in. The door was open, not ajar. Open, swung inward into utter blackness, and standing in the alcove, one hand resting on the doorframe, was the man in brown. He wasn't holding a lighter or a watch. He was just standing there, looking directly into the camera, a faint, inviting smile on his weathered face. He gestured with his head, a slight nod towards the impenetrable darkness behind him. Then he turned and walked into the sub-basement, disappearing from view. The door remained open. My radio buzzed. It was Harris. Her voice was calm, too calm. "Miller, the sub-basement door is open." "I see it," I said, my own voice like iron. "Do not approach. Return to the office. Now." "He's down there," she said, and I could hear the terrible magnetic pull in her tone. My uncle. He's down there." I heard him call my name. It was the culmination of every lure, every whispered lie. It had set the stage perfectly. The open door, the inviting gesture, the voice she so desperately wanted to believe. "Harris, listen to me. That is not your uncle. It is the man in brown. It is a trap. Return to the office. That is a direct order. What if you were wrong?" The question was a whisper, filled with a heartbreaking hope. What if he's been down there all this time? What if we were the monsters, Miller? She was at a crossroads. On one side was the cold, hard, lonely truth of the rules. On the other was the warm, hopeful lie of a family reunion. The museum had finally crafted a temptation I wasn't sure she could resist. I made a decision. I broke my own rule. I gave her a piece of the truth. "Harris," I said, my voice low and intense. "Your uncle, Mark Evans, he broke the rules. He forgot a countersign. Then, one night, he looked into the sub-basement. What came out, it wasn't him anymore. That thing down there is wearing his face. It is using his voice. But it is not your uncle. If you go down there, you will not save him. You will only become the next one it wears." There was a long, dead silence on the radio. I could picture her standing in some corridor, the open door, a yawning maw just around the corner, the voice of her uncle whispering promises from the dark. Then her voice came back, small and broken, but clear. "I am returning to the office." I let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. She had chosen the rules. She had chosen survival. I watched on the monitor as her figure appeared in the main corridor, walking quickly, resolutely, away from the alcove. She didn't look back. As she passed the camera, the door to the sub-basement, of its own accord, slowly swung shut. The lock engaged with a loud, final clunk that echoed faintly through the audio feed. When she entered the office, she didn't look at me. She went to the sink in the corner and threw up. I let her. When she was done, she rinsed her mouth and sat down heavily in the chair, her face ashen. "It is never going to stop, is it?" she asked, not looking at me. "No," I said. "It never stops. You just get better at holding the line." She nodded slowly. Then she picked up the logbook and a pen. She turned to a fresh page. Her hand was steady. "Amendment 10, she wrote. "The sub-basement door may open as a direct, personalized lure. This is a level 5 event. The recommended response is immediate radio contact with the warden and a full, verifiable debriefing. Under no circumstances is the threshold to be crossed. The voice from within is a composite lie." She had not only survived the ultimate temptation, she had codified the experience into a new rule. She was no longer just following the book, she was helping to write it. I looked at her, this young woman who had arrived scared and skeptical just weeks ago. The fear was still there, but it had been forged into a tool. She had the makings of a warden. The museum had tried to break her, and in doing so, it had tempered her. The night was quiet after that. The parameters, having been pushed to their limit, settled back into an uneasy stability. When her relief arrived, Harris stood and handed me the logbook. "I'll see you tonight, Miller," she said. There was no question in her voice. After she left, I sat in the silence for a long time. The master key felt heavy in my pocket. The line was still holding. But as I looked at the amendment Harris had written, I knew the battle was eternal. The rules were a living thing, and they required a living will to enforce them. For the first time since Shaw had left, I felt a flicker of something that wasn't dread. It was the faint, grim hope that when my time was finally up, the line would not break. There would be someone else to take the key. Please continue and close the story now. The final month of Harris S. training passed in a grim procedural harmony. The museum, having failed to break her with its most potent lures, seemed to retreat into a watchful, almost respectful silence. The anomalies became routine, the rules as natural as breathing. We fell into a rhythm, a silent partnership forged in the crucible of shared dread. I slept on the office couch less often, trusting her to hold the line alone for a few hours each night. She never gave me a reason to doubt. On her last scheduled night, a strange calm settled over the building. The air was still, the monitors showing nothing but the familiar, empty halls. It felt like the eye of a storm, a false peace I didn't trust. Harris performed her patrols with a quiet efficiency that was now second nature. She noted the Weeping Woman-S orientation, ignored the West Wing sensors, and hummed softly to herself as she passed the sub-basement door, its salt line pristine and unbroken. It was during her 3 a.m. patrol that I felt the shift, not on the monitors, but in the quality of the silence. The constant, low hum of the building systems seemed to deepen, to take on a resonant frequency that vibrated in my teeth. I watched Harris on the screen in the Greek gallery. She was walking past the statues, her gaze passing over their stony faces without a flicker of concern. Then she stopped. She was in front of the statue of Apollo. She didn't startle or back away. She simply stood there, looking at it. I leaned forward, my hand hovering over the radio. What did she see? After a long moment, she turned her head and looked directly into the camera. Her face was serene, her expression unreadable. She gave a single, slow nod. Then she turned and continued her patrol, her steps never faltering. She had seen something. A smile, a shifted expression, something that should have sent her fleeing. But she hadn't. She had acknowledged it, to me and to the museum, and had chosen to simply continue. It was a level of control I hadn't known was possible. She had moved beyond fear, beyond mere compliance. She had achieved a state of detached observance. She was finally ready. When she returned to the office at the end of her shift, the first gray light of dawn was staining the high windows. She placed her keys, her flashlight, and her radio on the desk with a sense of finality. "It's time, isn't it?" she said. It wasn't a question. I nodded. I reached into the desk drawer and pulled out the master key, the heavy iron one that had belonged to Shaw. I held it out to her. She took it, her fingers closing around the cold metal without hesitation. The weight of it seemed to settle in her hand, in her soul. "The rules are your life now," I said, echoing Shaw Chieh's final words to me. "Make them your legacy." She met my gaze, her eyes clear and steady. "I will." There was nothing more to say. I picked up my small duffel bag, the one I had brought with me on my first night a lifetime ago. I walked to the service entrance. I did not look back at the monitors, at the weeping woman, at the door to the sub-basement. That was her domain now. I unlocked the door and stepped out into the cool, fresh morning air. It smelled of rain and damp cobblestones, a scent so ordinary it was almost shocking. I walked to my car, the same beat-up sedan I had parked a block away all those months ago. I got in and sat for a moment, watching the museum recede in the rearview mirror, a blocky silhouette against the brightening sky. I drove to my small, sparse apartment. The final notice bills were still in the drawer. I paid them online, the numbers in my bank account dwindling, but no longer a source of panic. The debt was gone. The purpose it had given me was gone too. I slept for 14 hours straight. When I woke, the silence was deafening. There was no hum of monitors, no whisper of the ventilation system, no list of rules running through my mind. The world was soft and quiet and unbearably simple. A week later, a plain envelope was slipped under my door. It was thick with cash. My final payment. There was no note. There didn't need to be. I tried to live a normal life. I applied for jobs, went for walks, bought groceries. But my senses were attuned to a different frequency. I found myself counting the number of manhole covers on a street, avoiding certain reflections in shop windows, flinching at the sound of a child singing a familiar nursery rhyme. The world was full of patterns, and I had been trained to see the breaks in them. I was a compass needle that could only point toward one kind of north. One evening, as a light drizzle began to fall, I found myself walking down the familiar street, the one a block away from the museum. I stood in the shadow of a doorway and watched the service entrance. At 5 minutes to 10, a car pulled up. A young man got out, his shoulders hunched, a look of weary determination on his face. He walked up to the service entrance and knocked. A moment later, the door opened. Harris stood there, backlit by the warm, dim light of the foyer. She was wearing the navy blue uniform. It fit her perfectly now. She looked older, her face composed into the same mask of calm authority I had once worn. She said something to the young man, her voice too low for me to hear. He nodded, and she stepped back to let him in. The door closed behind them, the lock engaging with a sound I felt in my bones. I stood there in the rain for a long time, watching the silent brick facade. The line was holding. The rules were in good hands. I turned and walked away, my footsteps echoing on the wet pavement, a ghost from a war that would never end, leaving the new soldier to her watch. The museum was quiet for now.